Hello and welcome to this video, which will be taking a close look at validating your business strategy for superior results. My name is Cam Scully and I will be your host in this video. The term strategy validation is admittedly vague. In fact, I just checked Google and there are several different definitions of the term. So for our purposes, the type of validation I'm talking about is a business process that compares your actual business results to the strategic plan that was developed earlier. The insights you can gain from validation are impressive, from both a strategic planning perspective and also a strategy execution perspective. Now, if this all sounds vague, don't worry. The video has further explanations involved as well as a host of examples for you. Before we do that though, I want to lay some groundwork with you. I want you to think about strategy as a cause and effect hypothesis. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me demonstrate. Since strategy can get messy, all examples here are kept simple. I'm also using generic strategy terminology, but don't worry about that, you will see my points. Let's say that if we want to accomplish a particular strategic objective, then we will need to plan for and execute on a particular initiative, a particular project, and a particular strategic action. This if-then approach to planning your strategy is the essence of the cause and effect logic you should be building into your strategy. And now, cascading our hypothesis downward, if we want to accomplish this initiative, then we will need to accomplish a wide variety of tasks, activities, and tactics. You can see that if you would take this approach to planning and executing on strategy, all the work completed will be either directly or indirectly helpful in supporting the strategic initiative and the strategic objective. Okay, so like I mentioned, this example is quite simplified. Hopefully you see the point though, that in order to achieve strategy, we always want to connect the dots between strategic objectives and the work that needs to be done to achieve the objectives. So with all that in mind, now let's focus on the term validation. Validation, strategic validation, is essentially the process of confirming whether the expected strategic results were met. So those cause and effect linkages we went over, can we verify that the linkages we hypothesized were realized? We can explore this process at each level of the organization. Anytime we can verify that yes, the strategy was properly planned and executed, that's great news, and that's something we want to continue doing. Keep it up. Honestly though, the real richness of validation is when we often find that the answer is no. We have not validated the strategy. Investigating and determining what went wrong is usually where the richest insights are. Okay, so let's quickly walk through a nice, cleanly validated strategy so that afterward I can contrast this nice, clean strategy with disruptions that we find when you don't get a clean validation. So here we are at the activity and task level, and let's say that all the activities and tasks were completed on time and on schedule. This leads to a completion of the initiative, and let's say for our example that the project was also successful, as well as whatever separate strategic action was necessary here. And since we planned and executed well, the strategic objective was accomplished. That's a nice clean validation. And that's what we want. The more of these we have, the better. It won't surprise you, of course, though, that the validation process doesn't always come up with such nice, clean examples. In fact, most of the insights from validation are from investigating strategic issues and inconsistencies. To keep things simple, I like to look at validation failures from two perspectives. The first is a failure in strategy execution. In other words, the strategic plan was solid, we just did not implement it. The second type is a failure in the hypothesis developed during the strategic planning process. We did what we thought needed to get done. In other words, we executed on the strategic plan that was set, and we just somehow we failed. Let's have a look at an example of each of these two. Strategy execution failures usually happen when a strategic objective is not achieved. And when this happens, it's usually because some of the work planned to support the strategic objective was not successfully completed. For our example, let's say that the project and the action that were necessary were both executed sufficiently, but the initiative that was to be accomplished failed. In this case, you would want to do a deep dive into all of the operational work that was to be accomplished. Which pieces failed here? Okay, so that was a simple example of a strategy execution failure. The plan was fine, something went wrong in the implementation. The approach seems pretty straightforward, but keep in mind, actual strategy is never this clean and linear. And also keep in mind that validation needs to be done up and down each and every single strategic objective. This can be very resource consuming. So we always want to prioritize based on where we think our investigation efforts will add the most value. And we should never be afraid to hold people accountable if they aren't coming through with the results. Okay, so that was a look at strategy execution failure. Now let's have a look at a hypothesis failure. Okay, so it's the same strategic objective that was not accomplished. But lo and behold, this time, all of the work that was planned in order to achieve the objective was accomplished. So what's going on in this case? Something went off the rails here. It looks like the cause and effect logic was not used appropriately in planning out the strategy. This can be referred to as an output failure. That is, we took all the steps we intended to take, but still didn't get the results we were looking for. Now let's look at a second example, which you will see is a little bit different than the first. This time, we have actually achieved the strategic objective. And in our validation efforts, here is what we have observed. The initiative and the action went exactly to plan, but in this case, the project failed. So in terms of a hypothesis failure, this would be called an input failure. The project that was believed to be necessary to accomplish the strategic objective, well, we didn't accomplish it, and yet we accomplished the objective without it. This needs to be investigated as to why the project was believed to be necessary. And in this case, of course, we would want to have a look at the execution of the project itself, because something failed and we want to know what caused it to fail. So that is a brief look at strategy validation and how it can be useful. Let's have a quick recap before wrapping up. Strategy validation, if done well, will yield insight after insight. Any organization trying to get better, which should be all organizations, can benefit from a validation exercise. Most of your insights will either be from an execution perspective or a hypothesis perspective. Execution insights relate to where the strategy was planned properly, but there were failures in implementation. And hypothesis validation refers to strategy logic and where were the flaws in that logic. And yes, it can get messier than this where you have both scenarios taking place in one strategic area. And just a quick reminder that for all of this as a precursor, validation requires cause and effect logic to be built into the strategy, which I really recommend you want to do anyway. I hope that you have found this video to be useful and informative. If you would like to discuss further, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. And please also keep in mind that online services are available. Thank you for watching.